All right, let's go ahead and get going. So I hope you guys enjoyed Unit 1. We're hopping into Unit 2 now. So what I'm after here is a blood and B cell focused unit. So first I wanted to go through where the blood comes from, and that also includes our white blood cells that we've talked about so much, and specifically our B cells. As you guys started to see, our neutrophils, our macrophages, our dendritic cells, they started to just handle diseases in the same way. That's the property of innate immunity. Now, adaptive immunity is a bit more complex, so I wanted to spend more time on them. So this unit is going to go through the bone marrow and how that is used to generate all the types of blood cells that we come across. I'll talk a little bit about how clotting works, and then most of this unit is just going to be about B cells. So we talk about where the cells come from, how they grow up, and then how they make those awesome antibodies that help tag our infectors for deletion. So, but first things first, we got to talk about the daycare, where all the cells come from. So the bone marrow is soft, specialized connective tissue formed within the medullary cavities of bones. All right, so this is kind of the progression of how it looks over the years. But within the space inside bones, you have this soft connective tissue called bone marrow that is constantly generating different types of blood cells for you. All right, the inside, that nougat center of the bone, is dubbed the medullary cavity. What are the functions? Hematopoiesis. Hematopoiesis, you should definitely know that word. That is just fanciness for blood cell formation. Another function is it is the primary lymphoid organ for B cell maturation. Okay, so that's another reason why B cells are tied into this unit. The B cells hang out in the bone marrow. That's where they learn to become their, fully developed version of themselves. Okay, there is a little bit of development in the secondary organs as well, but they spend a lot of time here learning how to be themselves. Okay, my bad. Storage and iron recycling are very crucial as well. So you have extra blood stores at the ready, and with that is hemoglobin, which means with that is iron. And also we want to maintain our stem cell population, so the cells that give rise to the various types of blood cells, we have a progenitor, like the top of the top that can become any. So like think of it like as an evolutionary tree. It can end up producing any of the blood cells that we see that we've talked about. So we want to maintain those stem cells so I can differentiate into whatever I need at a moment's notice. So first up, we have two types of marrow that we need to discuss. We have red bone marrow. This is our hematopoietic marrow. This is the stuff that is actually making blood cells. So the site of active blood cell formation. All right. When you're very young, we'll talk about where hematopoiesis is occurring more so next lecture. But when you're very young, red bone marrow is almost everywhere. It's very, very common. As you age, it starts to kind of fade away. So, in the adult, axial skeleton all the time. That's what we need, okay? So, where is the axial skeleton? What do I mean by that? So, I want you to think of just like your core. So, get rid of your appendages, your arms and legs. Don't need those. For red bone marrow, that is. In your vertebra, sternum, ribs, skull, okay? So, if I were to draw a little guy here, axial skeleton is here. All right. So that's my head, my ribs, my spinal column, and my vertebrae. I guess that's part of spinal column. You got what I'm saying. All right. And I will say sometimes on the ends of the long bones, the proximal ends, so that means close to the point of origin, we'll have a little bit of red marrow. So you could extend that out maybe a little bit like that. So it's like a little mini person within the person. That's where most red bone marrow is in a developed human. That also includes your pelvic bones, so you have a good bit around here. And I already went over that. Okay, so red bone marrow, what you need to know, that is where hematopoiesis is occurring. So blood cell formation at its most productive and efficient. Yellow bone marrow, or fatty marrow, is primarily just adipocytes, so fat storage. All right, there's minor blood cell formation going on here, nothing crazy, and it's mainly going to be deep in those medullary cavities. So again, the nougat center within the bone. I don't know if you guys have ever had gone to a fancy steakhouse, but sometimes they serve the bones, and you have little bone marrow nougats in the center. You can look some up. I never tried it. I was a little scared, but a nougat is the best way to describe it. All right, so we can revert from yellow to red in severe conditions. I don't know much about this. I just did see this when I was researching for this class. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, yellow bone marrow, mostly for nutrient storage and maintenance within the marrow cavity. All right, let's talk about the microanatomy. So, like, what's actually going on within the bone? So we have two niches, two regions that I want to just get you aware of. So first up is the vascular niche, and then we'll have the endosteal niche. Vascular niche is exactly what it sounds like, vascular, a lot of blood vessels, So we can call those sinusoids. That's like the venous end. That's where all of that stuff is going to drain into. So they're very wide in diameter. The lining of those vessels is discontinuous. So it's let's see, how can I? So instead of a regular old tube here, well, maybe this tube has open spaces within it. Okay. I come back with a little eraser. Okay. I don't know if that point's getting across, but it's got openings in it, so things can pass through or pass out with relative ease. So that's really, really helpful if we are creating these precursors to all of these different types of blood cells, and we need to get them out, or we need to start developing a certain type of blood cell. We need to get it out into the blood, especially if like I'm deficient in one of those. So that easy access to circulation is very helpful. All right. Another cool thing, these vessels are going to enter and exit via something called a nutrient foramina. So a big old anatomical term, a foramina. Let's drop thickness here. There we go. Foramina is a hole. A hole. So if I go over to this little drawing here, so this is like my vascular niche where all of those vessels are hanging out and rolling in. So kind of around the medullary cavity. So this is my yellow marrow filling the nougat center there. And then I have all these vessels supplying the region. How the vessels get into the bone, you have little holes right here. And they're sparsed all throughout, and they're variable from person to person. Those are called nutrient foramina. Or I guess that's the plural. So that would be multiple nutrient foramina, one nutrient foramen. So that's cool. That's how those mini blood vessels enter the bone and supply the bone. And if we don't have those, then we don't get delivery of all this awesome stuff that we're creating into the vascular system. So pretty cool. Then on the flip side, you have your endosteal niche. Endosteal niche. So endosteal is referring to the inner surface of the bone. Okay? Near the endosteal bone surface. What do I mean by that? So let's go back to here. Endosteal, the inner bone surface. So if this is the outside of the bone, right, outside of the bone, this is the endosteal surface, the surface within. The surface within. Okay? All right. So So that's where those cells are hanging out. And this is where we are maintaining the hematopoietic stem cells, commonly abbreviated as HSC. So these guys are really important because they are stem cells. They are going to give rise to all of the different cells that we're going to talk about. Okay. You could do NK, T, etc. On and on. If we don't have these hematopoietic stem cells, we don't get any of our friends that we've talked about thus far. You also have some support cells, making sure things go the way they need to go, and those support cells secrete growth factors. Growth factors is a fancy word for chemical signals that tell the cells what they need to differentiate into. Okay? Because this obviously is not capable of thought, but depending on the signals that it receives, it'll go to an RBC, or it'll become a type of white blood cell, or so on and so forth. All right, so if for whatever reason my body's detecting that I'm low in red blood cell count, then I will secrete a compound we'll talk about soon here called EPO, erythropoietin, and that will tell these stem cells that, oh, he needs more red blood cells, let's make more. So those growth factors are really important. All right, you have two lineages, so two big splits, and we'll talk about this a lot with next lecture on the different pathways of hematopoiesis. You have your myeloid pathway and lymphoid pathway. Myeloid is your red blood cells, the cells that give you platelets, and your macrophages. You could also include some other cells in here. So I'm going to put granulocytes, but again, we're going to talk about this a lot more next class or next lecture. All right, and then lymphoid. Lymphoid is more so your adaptive cells, and this is why, if you folks remember, for the cellular lecture when I was introducing all these cells, yes, NK cells are part of the innate system, but they are actually part of the lymphoid lineage. They're part of the adaptive lineage, so these guys are kind of strange. Yes, again, still in the innate branch of things, but they are from adaptive roots, which makes them a rarity for sure. So that's the macroanatomy there for review. Vascular niche here, endosteal niche right here. Okay. Again, endosteal just referring to the surface within the bone. So if you want that in a drawing that scares the heck out of you, here's that endosteal surface. So we see a stem cell, stem cell, stem cell, stem cell, stem cell, stem cell, or maybe that one wasn't, but you know what I mean. And depending on the signals that they receive, they will differentiate into whatever cell that we need, and then they can hop on in to the vascular niche and leave, and go ahead and enter the vascular system. So that's kind of what I'm after here. We have the bone surface, they differentiate, and then they leave. All right, last slide. Again, to next, 2.2 is all on hematopoiesis, but I wanted to introduce the concepts to you. All right, so I kind of talked about it a little bit. Erythropoiesis. So your red blood cell's fancy name is erythrocyte. So this is just formation of erythrocytes, red blood cells. It's stimulated by something called EPO, erythropoietin, and that is from your kidney. Okay, so that your kidney is really good at detecting blood pressure. It gets a fifth of cardiac output. Kidney's very crucial for determining your systemic blood's behavior. Okay, so if we are low, the kidney will secrete that. If our hematocrit, if our red blood cell count is low, we will get erythropoietin, and that will tell my stem cells to go down this pathway. Fun fact, if anybody knows of Lance Armstrong, this is what he was using. This is why he was he was kind of caught red-handed. He was using erythropoietin to make his body make more red blood cells, thus increasing his ability to carry oxygen. So, a very a little immoral, but a cool way to describe how potent this stimulating factor can be. It can make you one of the best cyclists ever. Then we have granulopoiesis. So this is the granulocytes that I added in a little retroactively just now. We stimulate formation of those by this compound here. We'll talk about that more next class. But granulocytes are just all the types of cells that have granules within them. And you're like, well, that doesn't really narrow things down. It's a lot of things. Actually, we can go over here. So it's your basophils, it's your neutrophils, and your eosinophils, and your monocytes, which end up becoming your macrophages. All right, so it's basically all of those innate cells that we talked about, except for a handful. So if we want those innate white blood cells formed, then we go down the granulocyte, the granulopoiesis pathway. All right. And then thrombopoiesis, so a thrombocyte is a fancy word for platelets. And same kind of deal with EPO, except we have TPO. So if my plasma is low on these different clotting factors and platelets, or no, clotting factors is something else. If I'm low on platelets, then I'll have this TPO stimulation telling my stem cells to create more megakaryocytes. So I don't outright create platelets from my bone marrow. I create this big honking cell called a megakaryocyte. I know it has like way more genetic material than any other cell. It's a very strange one. And it's just this gigantic hog, and it sheds little bits of itself off. And those are platelets. So you don't outright make platelets. You make a big old honking cell that sheds parts of itself that become platelets. So kind of an extra step there. All right, then lymphopoiesis. So that is going to select for those adaptive cells and NK cells, stimulated by something called IL-7. It's one of your signaling factors. So if I get enough of that, that will send me down this other fork. This fork down here. Whoops, don't do that. Here we go. That'll send me down this pathway. And then I can get my NK cells and my lymphocytes. Okay. So now we can go to the clinical side of things. So I'm sure you guys have heard, like, sometimes you need your bone marrow examined or tested in some sort of way. There's two ways to do that. You can have bone marrow aspiration or bone marrow biopsy. Aspiration is more so checking the cellular content, and a biopsy is more so testing the structural info. So what does the bone marrow look like as a whole? What is the relationship between the contents within, as opposed to what are the cells specifically that I'm looking at? So this is more so for a catch-all, like looking at everything and the relationships within. So maybe like the architecture. And this is more so for like cell count, cell number. This is really crucial. Like aspiration can tell you like if there's too many, what's the term? Like blasts, which are progenitors, like not the final form of a cell. If there's too many of those left in circulation, that means that differentiation isn't occurring right. So you're stuck up here instead of getting a final product. So that would be an idea of looking at the cell counts and seeing what we have, and then biopsy is just looking at the whole picture, and that can give me an idea of the inner workings of the factory, if everything is working correctly or not. So that can be really, really helpful for diseases like like anemia, which is red blood cell deficiencies, leukemia, white blood cell deficiencies, and cancers that can, in any area of the body that's having a lot of division and a lot of replication, such as a site with stem cells. So these are constantly dividing and and differentiating. So with that comes a lot of genetic editing and a genetic and risk for genetic mutation is what I'm trying to say. And with that risk, you run the risk of potentially creating a cell that doesn't want to stop dividing, that is dividing forever. And that's cancer. That's a tumor cell, a cell with unregulated division. So you can imagine that understanding what kind of composition is within the bone marrow and what cells are being created and what the environment within looks like is really, really crucial for diseases such as these. So where do we go? How do we look? I've got this little patient's tuchus that I drew here, and we have like a intro or like a look into the spine here. So this is the last couple vertebrae, like L2, 3, 4, 5, and then we have the sacrum and coccyx. And here are my big old pelvic bones. And this is a great site of entry to test bone marrow. All right, so this top portion of my pelvic bone here is called the ilium. Okay, and this. So let me do this. So in red is the ilium, and this topmost edge of the ilium is the iliac crest. And it's actually very palpable on yourself, like you can feel it kind of sticking up. So if you can feel it with your thumbs, then a trained physician is probably quite capable of stabbing that bone and accessing the marrow within. And if we recall where I find most of my marrow, even in fully developed adults, it's in that axial core part of my skeleton. So you have a great bit of bone marrow here that's directly underneath the skin. There's no organ right here. There's no big nerve right here. There's no big vessel right here. What I'm trying to get at is we have a real great ease of access to this region. And that provides us with all of the content, all of the data that we need to diagnose any potential issues involving bone marrow. I will say you can also get it from the sternum. It's very fragile, or that's a rarity in proximal tibia. You can get that usually only in children because at that point, the bone marrow is probably more adipose, more yellow in the limbs in adults by then. So these are like special use cases, but I'd say if you're thinking bone marrow biopsy, it's iliac crest. And hopefully that gives us good data on diagnosing something like this. Okay. Yep, that's going to be it. And then next lecture is fully on this nonsense here. Okay, so buckle up, and thank you folks very much for listening.